Good afternoon, Dr. Roseman and fellow classmates. The title of this presentation is Inequalities Are Bad for Everyone's Health. Inequalities are bad for everyone's health. As a matter of fact, there's a book that shares the title of this essay. We know inequalities hurt those who suffer from inequality. This is tertiary level evidence at this point. This has been studied since the 1800s, and unfortunately the mountain of evidence still has not led to any type of change in societal thinking or policy level changes to address some of the most harmful types of inequality. But what if everybody knew how inequalities negatively affected everyone and why? Inequalities, especially economic disadvantages, lead to, and this is the thesis, something known as decreased social capital. A decrease in social capital leads to a decrease in trust in all institutions to include healthcare. It also leads to increased social isolation. That leads to decreased trust in all institutions. Racial inequalities and internalized evaluation go on to lead to decreased trust in all institutions. So you see an emerging theme here. Let's tell the story of three very different people and how social capital and the economic disadvantage and the gap in the very rich and very poor affects them all and other people. Phyllis is a 28-year-old Caucasian female. She's from a middle-class family in California. She has a bachelor's in nutrition, and she's married to a rather successful real estate agent. They have a 2-year-old son named Devin, but they don't believe in vaccination. Now, how does this affect the non-disadvantaged? I think you can see where I'm going with this. Devin contracts the measles. The entire preschool is exposed. He goes to a Christian Scientist preschool because they offer a vaccination waiver. And as a result, another child contracts the measles and dies. And that child was vaccinated, but the child was immunosuppressed from chronic corticosteroid management for childhood asthma. So when we look at this, we have to come to terms with some things that have been pointed out in several studies. One is as socioeconomic gaps widen, social capital declines. And that was from Bowling alone by Putnam. Now, what is capital, social capital? That's the ability of individuals to secure benefits and create solutions to problems via membership in social networks, and that's not just Facebook. A community with a high degree of social capital tends to put public good before private good, and levels of interpersonal and general trust are high. As social capital decreases, so does social trust in all established institutions, to include healthcare. The growing U.S. anti-vaccination movement that has been attributed to many high-profile numerous outbreaks has also been attributed to a growing distrust of the government and its health institutions. This is all a direct result of a decline in social capital, and that has been fueled by the divisions between the richest and the poorest that still continue to grow, and that's the backbone of Puck's book. A decline of social capital led Phyllis and Paul not to trust the advice of the CDC nor their pediatrician. Even though they didn't grow up in a disadvantaged family, the fluid effects of inequality fostered a general decline in social capital in the community. Phyllis and Paul read only material that reinforced their beliefs in anti-vaccination, which of course limited their ability to reason, and as a result, another child died. John's story. John's a 31-year-old Caucasian male from a disadvantaged family in North Philadelphia. However, John went on in life to lift himself out of that, and he had a bachelor's in computer programming. He's still single. He also suffers from bipolar disorder. He tends to be a little materialistic and envious of those who have more money than he is, since money was his highest goal, coming from a poor family. He earns about $75,000 a year, but he lives beyond his means, and he always has money trouble. John is actually experiencing increased social isolation, and his psychiatrist is concerned and tries to change his medications. John doesn't trust the health care system or pharmaceutical companies. He is suspicious. They make lots of money, and he's embracing natural therapy. His mood starts to elevate a little bit, and then because he's taking, grass or whatever instead of his mood medicine, and he publishes a website against pharmaceutical treatment of bipolar disorder. That website exists. How does this affect the non-disadvantaged? The website is so well produced with seemingly credible sources that it's visited by over 55,000 people, including a delicate type 1 bipolar man who starts taking valerian root instead of Zyprexa. This man enters an uncontrolled manic phase and goes on a mass shooting. He kills 5 people before being killed by police himself. Decreases in social capital as a result of income inequalities promote social isolation. Social isolation demonstrates that it's a determinant of many other chronic conditions and also can really have a profound effect on an existing mood disorder. Individuals also who are suffering from social isolation tend to feel vulnerable and cut off from social groups, and they're inclined to be anxious and pessimistic and less trusting. So, experimental evidence also shows that people who value money and material things are never quite satisfied, and they can actually have terrible feelings of discontent when they're exposed to materialistic cues. But more to the point here, the misinformation that John believed in and propagated led to harm to other peoples who had no economic disadvantage. Let's tell Renisha's story finally. She's a 34-year-old African-American female living in a very poor rural community in the South. She began substance abuse at a very young age, and she's HIV positive, and she has an HIV positive 16-year-old daughter via vertical transmission. Renisha sees very few prospects in life, and she's non-compliant with her HIV meds. She doesn't trust the physician. He's a wealthy white man. She feels better when she doesn't take the medications, and she doesn't really believe that she's going to die from this disease. She's hospitalized multiple times, but she always seems to get better, and her daughter tends to be cared for by her mother. This may sound familiar to you. So how does this affect the non-disadvantaged? Renisha's health finally fails, and she dies in hospice, but not before she transmitted the virus to 5 other people, including a healthcare worker by occupational exposure. Now, we don't have demographics on the 5 other people, but it's highly plausible that they did not suffer from the same disadvantage, maybe just engaged in the same type of recreational IV drug abuse. The prolonged effects of racial discrimination have been associated with a lower degree of trust in physicians. There were studies on this medication compliance in African Americans for years. I've been trying to follow this, and I'm waiting on a seminal article. But African Americans are also less likely than whites to be receiving antiretroviral therapy. And you have to adhere to antiretroviral therapy if you know anything about this disease to achieve viral suppression. Viral suppression is not only necessary to avoid immunosuppression and getting sick yourself when you have HIV, but it's equally as important to reduce the chances that you're going to transmit this virus to other people. So the conclusion here, inequality not only affects the disadvantaged, but it has the potential to affect the nominally advantaged. If we're truly going to motivate society into actions based on the mountains of evidence, then we probably need to demonstrate these butterfly effect relationships a little bit better and start demonstrating this complex relationship through stories, maybe.